For everybody online, thank you so much for joining us at today's HMSC Research Seminar. My name is Cinnamon Moffett. I'm the Research Program Manager at Hatfield Marine Science Center located in Newport, Oregon, and I will be your host for today's talk. Just letting folks know that haven't been with us before at seminar, we do have your mics, cameras, and screen shares disabled at this time, but we do hope that you put any questions into the chat box and we will answer them at the end. If it is a clarifying question, we might interrupt today's speaker, but otherwise we'll get to them at the very end of today's presentation. Wanted to let everybody know we are also recording today's event. And I'm going to put into the chat right there the place where you can get that recording probably tomorrow afternoon after I get it processed and put up. Feel free to share it with folks that weren't able to join us today or to watch it again if you missed something and you wanted to see it. So feel free to use that. It will be up again in a few days. Quick announcement, we will not have a seminar next week on February 3rd, but hope you will join us the following week on February 10th when Laura Brophy, the director of the Estuaries Technical Group for the Institute of Applied Ecology, will be talking to us about the past, present, and future of the tidal wetlands in the Yaquina Bay Estuary. This was a seminar that was scheduled right before the holidays, I believe, and it had to be rescheduled and is part of our past, present, and future of Yaquina Bay seminar series. So I think it's the third talk in that mini series. So I'm hoping that you can join us and learn a little bit more about our local estuary. If you need any information about any of the Hatfield events, you can go onto the HMSC's homepage, scroll to the bottom, and you will get a calendar of events there. And if you click on any of the events, you'll get any of the links and login information you might need. But for today, I'm actually going to hand this off to Laura Lilly, who is a postdoctoral scholar with Oregon State University and NOAA, and NOAA's Northwest Fisheries Science Center, located here at Hatfield. And she's the one that actually invited today's speaker. So Laura, do you want to introduce our speaker for today?
Sure, thank you, Cinnamon. And thank you all so much for coming to listen to what will be a really exciting talk. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Nathalí Cordero-Quiros, who is currently working with, as you can see, UC Santa Cruz and NOAA's Southwest Fisheries Science Center. And she comes to us from a very strong modeling and physical oceanography background. So I'm excited for her to bring in a bit of information about Eddy Kinetic Energy across the CCS. But before NOAA, Nathalí, she comes to us from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where she completed her doctoral work with Art Miller. And she was also a fellow student of mine and my roommate for several years. And we both studied El Nino at the time. So we're still working on brainstorming our collaborative El Nino from modeling to zooplankton paper. Stay tuned. But before Scripps, Nathalí did her master's in oceanography at CSESE down in Ensenada, Baja California. And she also, outside of oceanography work, enjoys hiking. She's very passionate about yoga, and she loves craft beers. And I know she was disappointed not to be able to come up to Oregon in person this time, because obviously a lot of her interests would fit very well in Oregon. So I hope that, if you find her talk interesting, hopefully she'll be able to come up to Newport and Corvallis at some point to meet more in person. But thank you again to Nathalí, and we're really looking forward to your talk.
All right, Nathalí, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura, for that introduction, and thank you, Cinnamon, for having me, and thank you all for attending to my seminar. I'm very, very excited to be here today virtually, but maybe in the near future I can go out visit and talk to you folks in person. I'm going to be presenting today the future of eddy kinetic energy in the California current system from 3 downscale climate projections. And I feel like I have to start by giving a brief refresher of the importance of the California current system, right? Because this is a very productive region, and it's actually part of one of the biggest eastern boundary upwelling systems. And these areas are characterized by being very productive. In fact, they hold, just the 5 of them, they hold almost 20% of the fisheries catch in the whole world. So the CCS supports one of the most productive regions in the world, and it provides different ecosystem services, such as recreational services, but also fishery services, right? And the California current system is under the influence of major climate events, such as El Niño southern oscillation, but there is also a degree of intrinsic variability within the system. So variability that's going to happen at regional scales. And perhaps one of the most important factors contributing to this variability is the mesoscale field, which is very energetic in the California current system. And I would like to start by looking at this highly energetic mesoscale field from kind of a color dye perspective, right? Because it's always cool to look at the mesoscale this way. So for example, here we're looking at phytoplankton blooms and currents from ocean satellite, and we can see the US West Coast and also the north of Baja California and Mexico. And we can see how the phytoplankton follows the main velocity field and how it kind of wiggles along the coast. And if we look closer too, this is a different image. This is chlorophyll derived from ocean color. And we see again how the chlorophyll also follows these meanders, and these meanders follow the shape of the coast. So this meandering pattern is going to be very affected by the shape of the coast as well. So this meandering of the California current has been observed to be almost a semi-permanent feature of the California current. So these meanderings are going to contribute to kind of the mean state of the velocity field. So if we think in terms of kinetic energy, the California current and its meanderings are part of the mean state of the velocity. So that's going to be one of the contributors to the mean kinetic energy. But then if we look farther, if we look closer, we also see, besides these semi-permanent meanders, we see that there are some filaments and some eddies here and there, and all these noisy structures that hinge off from the main structure of the California current. And these structures that seem to be random at some point are what's going to contribute to the transient kinetic energy in the California current system. So these can be either gyres, filaments, or different structures that are not fixed in time. So this is what we call transient kinetic energy, or eddy kinetic energy. And as I said, these features can be very important because they not only transport things like phytoplankton or chlorophyll in and out of the coast, but they also transport other biochemical properties that are very important for the ecosystem, such as carbon. So for example, here we're looking at a study by Kaylin Amos, and they derive particulate organic carbon from satellite, which is what you're seeing in the color scale, and then the contours correspond to sea level height also from satellite. And you can see, for example, this little eddy that starts detaching from the main structure of the California current. And you can see the evolution of the eddy until it almost completely detaches from the frontal region. But it seems to carry with that this particular concentration of organic carbon. So I think looking at mesoscale activity from satellites and from these kind of figures can be very interesting, because it's very easy to see where the eddies are. And if you look at it this way with different nutrient concentrations, it's also kind of cool to see how they really spread these biochemical properties around the California current system domain. And of course, as I said, since these eddy features really spread and move around things within the ecosystem, of course, it's easy to imagine how these structures can be very important for the energy flow within the food web in the ecosystem, right? Because if they transport things as primary producers, the phytoplankton, of course, they're going to have important implications over these bottom-up interactions in the food web. And in fact, there have been some studies that have found that areas of high or of intense mesoscale activity are going to be hotspots for foraging for top predators. So these predators like seals, even sharks, they're going to like to hang out around these eddy structures. So looking at it this way, I think it's very interesting to understand how is a mesoscale field in the California current system behaving, and what is a link to the ecosystem, and moreover, how is this gonna change over time in a planet that is getting warmer? The ocean is getting warmer, and as we know, the ocean is very sensitive to these kind of changes. So what are the effects over the mesoscale field, and how are these effects going to interact with the biology? So that's one of my main questions here. So how will these dynamics be affected under a changing climate? And so now that I hopefully hooked you up a little bit with why it's important studying these features in the ocean, these Eddy Kinetic Energy features, I'm gonna start talking a little bit about the physics behind all of this. So you may be wondering, okay, how do we quantify mesoscale changes? How do we actually measure them? And as I've been showing, one way of looking at it would be by satellite images, but then the other way of actually quantifying these components in the equation here is we're looking at the time varying components of the main velocity field, right? So going back to the equation, we have that the kinetic energy is going to be given by the mean kinetic energy of California current, the semi-permanent meanders, and then there are these other eddy or transient features such as gyres, filaments, or different mesoscale structures that are more noisy, that are going to be contributing to this term. And this is the term that I'm going to be speaking of today. The other thing that is important to look at here is what are the actual mechanisms that are driving changes in eddy kinetic energy, or that even drive the origin of eddy kinetic energy in an environment such as the California current system. So if we remember the dynamics, or the typical dynamics of the California current system, of course, we need to think about upwelling, right? So we have this wind pattern that is blowing from north to south, that is going to originate advection of water, surface water away from the coast, and these waters are being replaced by cooler, richer in nutrients and denser waters that are being upwelled. And because of these differences in density and pressure, there's going to be this coastal jet that is in dystrophic balance with the tilt of the isopigmals. So this jet is going to become very important in eddy kinetic energy formation in the future. And there have been some studies that have shown that this upwelling jet can be actually scaled in terms of vertical differences in density. So the stratification here is going to be a very, very important factor in generation of eddy kinetic energy, because the instabilities associated with this jet are going to give rise to dynamic instabilities. And the other factor here is that this is slope of the isopycnals given by the differences in density is going to be a kind of a reservoir of available potential energy, right? So once the slope starts to flatten, this dynamical instability is what's going to provide kind of the raw material for this available potential energy to transform into eddy kinetic energy. So if we talk about stratification, one way of measuring the stratification is of course the buoyancy frequency. So we have that the jet, the instabilities associated with this upwelling jet are going to be closely related to stratification. So we're interested too in stratification, not only in the coastal zone, but in general, also across the frontal region of the California current system. So stratification is going to become a very important measurement in this study. So in a nutshell, we have the winds blowing along the coast, and there is advection of water from the surface, water's being upwell. So this is going to create the jet that is in dystrophic balance with this tilt of the isopycnals. And the differential in density is what's going to generate, or is what's going to provide this raw material for generation of eddy kinetic energy, right? So we have that stratification can be very tightly related to eddy kinetic energy generation. And this is what my presentation is going to focus on, and this is what I'm interested in proving how true this is and how it changes over time. So one way of, one of the ways, of course, of measuring these kind of quantities in the ocean, besides observations, are, of course, models. And I'm going to be using this model, these simulations that are with the ROMs. So the particular thing about these simulations is that they use the ocean boundary conditions, and the forcing comes from an Earth system model. So these models were taken from the CIMIC 5 members, and these models were, these were the 3 models that were selected, and these projections were developed by Mercedes Pozo. So yeah, there are projections that go until 2100, so end of century, and the RCP 8.5 scenario, so high greenhouse gas emission scenario. And these Earth system models are going to provide the forcing for the ROMs, so we can use these downscale, dynamically downscale climate projections. So I'm going to be taking measurements of eddy kinetic energy from these simulations, and also stratification from the whole period of time from these 3 simulations. The resolution is 10 kilometers, and it has 42 vertical levels. So the way I calculated eddy kinetic energy was, as I said before, this is representative of the time varying mean of the velocities. So I computed the monthly climatology from the whole from the simulations, and then I removed this climatology from the daily fields, and at the end I obtained a monthly mean of eddy kinetic energy, a monthly mean that is obtained from daily values. And then I'm also going to compare 2 monthly values of buoyancy frequency calculated from these simulations too. So my results are going to be divided into, first I'm going to talk a little bit about the climatology of eddy kinetic energy in the California current system. And then the second part is gonna be relating these changes in eddy kinetic energy with changes in stratification in the California current system. So the first figure shows summer climatology. So that would be the mean of from June to August for 4 different periods within the simulation. And we can see the 4 different periods and then the 3 different models. So the first period is what I refer to as historical or the reference period. And basically it's showing us where those locations where eddy kinetic energy is highest at the present, right? So the color scale is just the values of eddy kinetic energy. And then we can see how eddy kinetic energy, it kind of conserves this pattern that is off the coast and along the US West Coast. But we can very obviously see how eddy kinetic energy increases by the end of the century. So another way of looking at the increase is I computed the ratio between the future period and the historical period for the 3 different simulations. So we're seeing at the, again, this is summer, June, July, August. And the color scale this time is just the result of this ratio. So as you can see, everything is above 1, and there are some locations where eddy kinetic energy by the end of the century increases basically up to 5 times in some regions. So then what I did, thinking a little bit about what is the relation between this EKE increase in the California current system and stratification, I wanted to see what's the vertical shear of the density in these regions, right? So I selected kind of by eye, I selected these regions where the increase of eddy kinetic energy is consistent among the 3 models. And what I did was to average just the rho DC over these little boxes, the selected regions. And then we're looking at, again, the same periods. So this would be the mean of the vertical shear of the density. And we can see how in blue is the reference period, and then in orange is the end of the century period. And we can see that stratification, as indicated by the rho DC, it's also increasing into the future, right? So this is in agreement with what we expected. The other thing that I did was to look at the buoyancy frequency too, and well, we can see how the buoyancy frequency, also a proxy for stratification, increases all over the domain. All the ratios are above 1, and then we can also see that the 2 simulations that show a more intense increase in buoyancy frequency, which are the Hadley and the IPSL models, and then the GFDL. It increases, but not with the same intensity. And just to compare in general and over the whole domain, the buoyancy frequency to eddy kinetic energy, what I did was I looked into the principal components of both the eddy kinetic energy and the buoyancy frequency, and then I correlated them. So we're looking at the leading component on blue and on the left of eddy kinetic energy, and on the right in orange we have the leading component of the buoyancy frequency. And you can see, I forgot to put the numbers here, but all the correlations are above 60%. And you can see how they're very, even just by looking at the time series, you can see how the eddy kinetic energy almost overlaps with an increase in buoyancy frequency. So these results show that looking at these simulations, the increase up to 5 times by the end of the century in eddy kinetic energy is very tightly related to increases in stratification, and this increases in the vertical shear of the density. And of course, part of my future work and the things that I'm interested in is to better quantify these links between eddy kinetic energy and ecology. And the way I'm thinking about it is, well, there are some of my colleagues are working with projections of species, of different species, seals, sharks, sea lions, I don't remember if whales, but essentially I'm very interested in taking the spatial distribution of these species and doing some kind of analysis that will tell me if these species are in the future located around centers of high mesoscale activity. And that's it. That's everything I have for today. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Cinnamon. Thank you, Laura, for having me. And I also want to thank to the ERD group and NOAA, to Stephen, Mike, and Matt. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For everybody online, feel free to put your questions into the chat. We are a small enough group. You can also raise your hand and ask a question verbally if you would like. If it's easier for you to do so, you can go ahead and put that into the chat or raise your hand and we can get to those questions. And I can kind of start us off, and you're going to hear in my question that this is outside of my realm of expertise for sure. But you had talked about an increase in energy over time. And I'm wondering whether the location of where those eddies kind of break off from the main current, whether you saw a shift in that location, the locality of where those happened as the energy changed, or whether it was more of a increase in energy and a change in the frequency and the duration of those eddy production?
That's a very interesting question. I didn't look. So short answer, no, I didn't. So besides the first image that I show that kind of shows a spatial evolution of eddy kinetic energy, I didn't look more into what other spatial features are changing, if that makes sense. Yeah, and one of the things too is because, I mean, one of the reasons for that too is that these fields are, I mean, even in the models are random fields, right? So I think it's challenging to project or to predict these features, even because it's completely random. Like the relationship between EKE and stratification, that's, I mean, even if the simulations have random mesoscale fields, like that relationship is very clear. But yeah, if more eddies are going to be shedding off from the California current in the future, I don't know, but it is a good question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about if not only more, but if the location of those eddies changed and what the impact of that would be on the ecosystem and some of those shifting systems that are related and connected to those eddies would change over time.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I think these locations can be related, I mean, of course, to locations where stratification is higher. So that would be one way to look at it.
Yeah. I was just curious and I thought I would ask since it's
I think it's a great question. The other thing is that I feel like sometimes we get confused between eddy kinetic energy and actual gyres, right? Because eddy kinetic energy is everything that it's out of the mean velocity field. So it can be cyclones, anticyclones, it can be just random filaments of velocity that are shedding off the main structure.
All right. Everybody online, feel free to jump in and have any questions that you might have. Laura, do you have anything else that you might want to ask or add clarity to? All right, folks are being mighty quiet. So Nat, I was wondering on either in the chat or I can't remember if it was on your first or your last slide, do you have your contact information where folks, if they want to ask a more detailed question, might be able to reach you?
I put in the chat.
Okay, that sounds great. For folks online, then if you would like to follow up with some more detailed questions for Nathalí, then you can do that. She's going to put her contact information into the chat. And there it is. So if you are interested in contacting her, feel free to reach out there. Just a reminder for our seminar series that we do not have a seminar next week, but we do the following week on the 10th. So I'm hoping that you will be back and to join us. Nathalí, any last comments for us as we wrap up here?
No, thank you so much. I mean, just a quick comment. Like, obviously I come from a physical background, like physical oceanography background, but I'm very interested in linking these structures to ecology. And I mean, I mentioned at the beginning some examples of how these regions of high mesoscale activity can be hotspots for biology, which was very new to me. Like I had no clue of these things. So if someone is interested in looking into that or knows something that I should know about that, please feel free to come and contact me. I see a hand. Great.
Yeah, so Margaret, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Go ahead.
Hello, thanks for your talk. I had a question about whether you did any kind of, I guess like a sensitivity test, maybe like if you run the model from different starting conditions, like you get different predictions for the eddy kinetic energy. Like, is there a big role of internal variability in the future projections, or is it really consistent? I was just wondering, like, uncertainty in these predictions.
Yeah. I mean, there is, I don't think I have any. I haven't measured what's the uncertainty related to eddy kinetic energy. I didn't run these simulations myself. They were done by Merposa. Yeah. So I'm sure that in her paper, she talks about what's the uncertainty related to SST, for example. So, I mean, because these are members from the CIMIC 5. But no one had calculated eddy kinetic energy within this before. And I haven't measured the degree of uncertainty of eddy kinetic energy.
Okay, so is the fact that the three models that you compared, they're kind of different? Anything or?
I mean, these models have, like the Earth system models, they use the same forcing. So essentially, those were made, like the three of them, these models has boundary conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question, Margaret. Give everybody just a second more to either raise their hand or throw a question in the chat. All right, Nathalie, I think we're going to let you off the hook. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. You're getting claps and thank yous in the chat. So just so you know, we really appreciate you being here and sharing this information. And for folks online, if you need to reach out, Nathalie's contact is in the chat. And for everybody else, hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks. So for now, everybody, until next time, thank you.
Everyone, bye.
Bye.